Okay. Awesome, great. And I just want to welcome everybody again. I'm Karen Katz with the Office of Children's Mental Health, and we're just absolutely thrilled to be able to offer this learning session today. So we're calling it Collective Impact Learning, and really what we hope to do in these spaces is feature an OCMH partner. And today we are so pleased to have one of our lived experience partners with us leading this session. Her name is Dr. Tracy Loken Weber, and she's going to share research and findings from her doctoral dissertation. So she explored the perspective and lived experience of women with adverse childhood experiences who dropped out of high school and then navigated that whole process of returning to education through adult literacy programs. So they were working on remedial educational skills in order to prepare for their GED. After Tracy's presentation, we will have time for Q&A. So as you're listening to Tracy's presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And then we'll sort through those and pull those out for Tracy at the end. So just a couple of protocols here. Please, everybody is so good at this, and all of you are, but please do remember to mute yourself. I'm asking people to introduce yourself in the chat, because one of the goals of our work here is to get people to know each other. Many of you do know each other, but please do introduce yourself in the chat, and then feel free to use that private chat to communicate. It is available. And we encourage you to use it. And then again, questions in the chat will be great for the Q&A. So without any further ado, I would just like to tell you a little bit about Tracy before I hand it over to her. So Tracy has over 25 years of community leadership and service. She's actively serving on a numerous local, state, and international boards. She currently serves as the co-chair for the Wisconsin Children's Mental Health Collective Impact Council as a parent partner. And she also is serving on the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod as in their foster care advisory group. Tracy is currently serving the UW-Milwaukee Child Welfare Partnership Program as a foster, adoptive, and relative statewide trainer. She's also a trained parent peer support specialist, a mental health advocate, Amazon best-selling author, and certified life coach. We're absolutely delighted to have her with us today. With that, I am going to stop sharing and introduce you to Tracy.
Sounds good. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to hear about 5.5 years of research. Excited to be here with you and to share this life journey that I've been on in pursuing a doctorate degree. In high school, I could have been one of the women here that I interviewed, as my guidance counselor in high school shared with me that I wasn't smart enough to go on to college. And I often wonder how many other youth and folks struggle with that same thing. So I'm going to make sure everybody's muted here, and then we'll continue on. So I wanted to do this research study on women who dropped out of high school, who went back to an adult literacy program to work on remedial education, to work on and successfully complete their GED. Initially, when my focus started, I was solely focusing on the adult literacy component. And then one of our children was having a mental health crisis during my study weekend. And my why shifted. And my why shifted to include adverse childhood experiences. And how did trauma play a role in a woman's decision to drop out of high school? And really took a look at that trauma that they experienced, what was their ACEs score, and what did they need to do to get back into an adult literacy program to receive that remedial education and successfully earn their GED. When I was going through research and discovering, is this something that needs to be researched? In 2021, Reeves identified that there's limited data when it comes to high school dropouts, especially that for females, because there's currently no federal mandate to collect this data, that there's an unreported gender gap in high school graduation rates, in addition to no data for national high school graduation rates for girls and for boys. So then I continued to dig and study and think through this. And so some of what I needed to know is like the ACEs scores of women to be able to qualify to get into this interview. They had to have dropped out of high school. They had to go to an adult literacy agency to work on remedial skills, and then they had to successfully complete their GED. And then at the end, I wanted to measure growth post-trauma experiences. And so that's when I used the post-traumatic growth inventory. When we take a look too here in 2019, Anderson conducted some research that found we need to really get to the root cause of the dropout problem. What is this? And his recommendations was that it's going all the way back to childhood trauma. And he stated here, the impact of childhood trauma on behavior, learning, and graduation outcomes indicate that we just haven't drilled deep enough into the root cause of the dropout problem, childhood trauma. And so this study takes a look at 5 women completed the study that have 1 or more ACEs, and the median ACEs score was 8. So if you know anything about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, it's based off of 1 to 10. The higher the number, the more adverse childhood experiences you have been a part of. It really helps to open up the dialogue for women who have dropped out of high school and some of the struggles that they've been through. In addition to these women, sharing the same phenomena of their educational experiences, along with the transformative journey that they each went through and had. And then really that impact of ACEs and how it continues to create future research, especially as it's related to childhood trauma, high school graduation rates, and also, tying in the impact of adult literacy. And you're probably wondering, where's the adult literacy component coming into play here? I spent 15 years of my life, my career in K-12 education, both working with youth from pre-kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, but also in the adult literacy component of working with service educators on integrating technology into the curriculum. And that was in Minnesota. And then when I moved here to Wisconsin, I fell into the world of adult literacy and realized what a challenge it is for adults who do drop out of school, who struggle with basic skills, not only to support themselves, but working 2 to 3 jobs and then also trying to support their children. And the 10 years that I worked in that field here in Milwaukee, how many parents were struggling to make ends meet, to support their children in school, to support their children out of school, to be able to understand and comprehend the materials being sent home from teachers. And so when I needed to take a look at the review of literature, what I did is I dialed into high school dropouts, did a deep dive in research that I could find in that category, the adult literacy field, and imprisonment. And I wanted to see how trauma is that middle piece here of how that impacts all of that. And some of the findings here is that with high school dropouts right now, there's 1 high school student dropping out every 26 seconds. 26 seconds. That's 2,900 students a day, 1.2 million annually. UNESCO takes a stance here that literacy and education are both human and civil rights. However, in the US, we are experiencing considerable dropout rates for students. 1.2 million students is a lot. And then we take into consideration the National Women's Law Center back in 2017 stated that the female dropout rate was at 41%, but that's 2007, that's years ago. And then pro-literacy here is really stating that 54% of adults ages 16 to 74 years old, or 130 million adults in the United States, lack that literacy proficiency that they need. Furthermore, another 36 million adults who struggle and cannot read at a 3rd grade level. That's a lot of parents, I have a feeling, right? And so when we really start to think back and go through all of this, we've got a crisis on our hands. Further research here in the adult literacy field identifies that over 774 million adults globally are illiterate, with 2/3 of them, 493 million, are considered to be women. And then the next step in some research is the imprisonment sector. And in 2022, Brock and Brecken were able to identify that 56% of women incarcerated in state prison entered without a high school diploma. And they further identified a gap here in women's adolescent schooling stories of their experiences from their perspectives and their voice of their lived experience of dropping out of the struggles that they had in school. And so the research project that I conducted here really helped to fill some of that empirical research that's just not out there right now. So what I did was I had identified eligibility requirements here for this study, and for them to be identified as female between the ages of 25 and 54. And that's based off of national employment data rates. And so that's why I chose that age range. They had to drop out of high school before graduation. They needed to return to education by attending an adult literacy program, to work on remedial education, to successfully prepare for and meet their GED requirements, meaning that they completed all of the GED exams. They had to score at least 1 or higher on the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And as we all know, I shared the median was 8. So all of the women interviewed here had high ACEs. They had to be willing to donate and voluntarily donate here 45 to 120 minutes for an interview without compensation and possibly for a follow-up interview. Be available for member checking. So after I collected their stories, I circled back and asked for confirmation that the information that I gathered was correct. And in total, 8 women across the United States responded to participating in this interview. 6 qualified, met the qualification requirements here to be a part of the study. And then 5 completed the interview process from start to finish. This was a snowball referral method where friends shared information, national organizations happened. Recruitment was with national organizations, affiliate members, adult literacy agencies, Wisconsin State Technical College System, and social media. So we really tried to get the information out nationwide. We conducted the interview here via Zoom, and it provided safety both for the study participants and the researcher, while allowing them to participate in an environment that was familiar and felt safe to them. And as you can imagine, it was some pretty powerful information that they were sharing. One-on-one interviews happened with the research participant and myself. They went between 45 and 90 minutes. The interview was a semi-structured interview process that was used to collect and analyze the data, but also allowed for further explanations and explorations of questions that I may have as they were answering the questions that I gave them. It was a semi-structured process. They shared their firsthand knowledge of their lived experiences of dropping out of high school, what it was like to return to obtain their GED through remedial adult literacy and earn their GED. And the interviews were conducted just this last June, June 23rd through July 11th. So to put some of this in perspective, I was like, how can we share this? How can we make 32 million more visual? And I was like, well, let's just add up the populations of different states to get us as close as 32 million as we can. And the Children's Defense Fund has identified that K-12 systems are failing to provide about 25% of students with the supportive services to meet their academic needs. And that data is coming from 2021. So if 25% of our students are struggling to meet their basic needs, and we know that about 1/4 of all Americans are high school dropouts, Gallup was able to share with us that 36 million adults are struggling to read, 32 million are lacking a high school diploma. And I know that these are a lot of numbers, but if we take a look at 32 million high school dropouts on the image in front of you, that's the populations of every single person in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, New Mexico, Kansas, Arkansas, Vermont, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Oregon, Nevada, Maine, and New Hampshire. It's a lot of people. We were also able to identify the Children's Defense Fund in 2021 stated that in schools today, 1,785 children are confirmed to be abused or neglected. Over 1,900 children are arrested every day in schools. 2,900 students are dropping out of high school. And over 14,200 students in public schools are suspended every day. It's a lot. So what are we doing wrong? What do we need to rethink? How can we start meeting some of those basic needs of students? And then if we really take a look at 130 million people, that's 54% of adults lacking basic literacy proficiency. There's the image in front of you. And it's really hard to believe that so many Americans are struggling with literacy. And these are the adults that are tending to our future generations. And so how can we really start to think about what needs to shift and what needs to change? In 2021, the fiscal adult literacy funding budget from the government was $78.8 million. That's about $2.19 per adult who is in need of basic literacy skills annually. In 2021, the Children's Defense Fund reported that the projected current expenditure per student in public elementary and secondary schools was to be at $14,000. So that's $709 billion. And then the incarceration rate. The United States here spends 2.5 times more on imprisoned individuals than on K-12 students, leaving marginal funding for adults who failed the K-12 system. That's significant. And so we're spending a lot of money on the back end and less on the front end. And this doesn't even take into consideration the early childhood field and where funding is in that. So that is definitely something to consider in the future. The demographics of women in this study, one was Jamaican of Irish descent, 2 were Caucasian, 1 was African-American, and 1 Hispanic. This is where the fun begins, folks, because never did I think we would have women from coast to coast having educational experiences in 10 states. And so this is a geographic representation of the women interviewed, where they had educational experiences. And it was very powerful for me to lay it out on a map like this, so you can see the women that were interviewed and took the time out of their lives to share very heartfelt personal stories of their struggles and also their successes. Women experienced educational experiences both in public inner city schools, public suburban, public rural, public and homeschooled. And then one here was private for K-8 and then public for 9th through 12th. So even during the interview process, women had vast experiences in education, and they still experienced significant struggles to the point where they dropped out of school. So the main question here is, how do ACEs affect a woman's decision to drop out of high school? And what research participants had to overcome in their personal lives to return to adult literacy programs to work on those remedial skills and prepare for and successfully complete their GED. And some of the key findings here is the major reasons mentioned by the 5 participants that led them to drop out of high school was really surrounded around trauma, abuse, lack of motivation, unfavorable learning structure, and overall the lack of support. The women stated that they didn't have adults who they could turn to and who they could trust and turn to for support at home, in the community, at school. They felt unsupported. They felt that while they were in school, that no one truly cared about them or their academics, and that they had a feeling that they were just not connected to someone at home in the community and at school. And so that lack of connection, the lack of supporting caring adults, the lack of guidance was the real root cause of them dropping out. When we take a look at ACEs and adverse childhood experiences and the brain development, I always think it's powerful to show this image, especially for those that are in academia that are joining us today and realizing that children that have an adverse childhood experience, their brain is different and they're struggling. They're struggling typically at home in the community and especially at school. And so if we can understand with the suspensions that I listed earlier, and the students, being arrested and struggling in school, how can we meet the basic needs of these youth, knowing that their brain is different, that how they operate is different? And when we take a look at ACEs here versus those basic needs, it's really important to take in consideration. On the left is the ACEs chart here, that which influences, health and well-being and everything throughout the lifespan of a child. And then on the right side, we see what kids and adults and everyone needs, that physical needs, those safety, the air, the water, the food, the shelter, the sleep, the clothing, all of that. And so in order for a child to learn and be successful, they need to have these basic needs met. When these basic needs are not being met, it leads for a child to spiral, to be out of control, to have difficulties, which led for these women in this study here to make the choice. It was just easier to drop out of school. And I'll share some of their story with you in just a little bit. So the main findings of this research, there's broken into 3 different themes here. The first theme was their reasons for dropping out: abuse, lack of family support and connection, the financial constraint, the difficulties within being in the classroom. And then the next theme here is going back to school, the challenges that they faced with funding and transportation and childcare. And then the feelings that they had about going to school, like they just had to finally say, like, I needed to get back in this. And I have some names that I'm going to mention. These aren't their real names. These are pseudonyms for them. But, Alyssa here explained that she dropped out of school due to teenage pregnancy and undiagnosed ADHD. And this is her quote: "I got pregnant when I was 17. I was also short of credit. So that was the driver. I had ADHD my whole life and I went to private schools. My dad and mom and stepmom had very strong opinions about treating me for ADHD, and I didn't have the support that I needed." Diana mentioned here that she was being bullied by a teacher and students in the classroom. The teacher who was supposed to be helping me, but she was a big bully. And so she targeted kids and she was horrible. And that's why I dropped out. So we can see the importance of educators and what a role that they play. And then she further stated that Diana stated here that she had abuse and neglect she faced at home, in the school, just became that fun place to get away from home. She wasn't interested or bothered about her grades and nobody cared. And she said, and then we had food insecurities and I couldn't focus because I was hungry and my focus just was never on school. School was not a priority. It was just get through the day. So the school became a fun time instead of a learning time. And then I just had to survive. And then Cece mentioned here that the school was lacking justice and was lacking, and because of that, it led to her dropping out. And there just simply wasn't inclusion or diversity. And she shared, the structural disparities and the facts that prevented me from participating in large and small organizations. And I have that the school just had no commitment to justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I will absolutely not sit by and be a revisionist of history, or make people of color participate in anything. So there was significant feelings that the women had. Beatrice explained here that it wasn't her decision to quit, but her mom was addicted to drugs, and in a drug addiction and drunkenness, her mother went to the high school and just unenrolled her because she didn't want to deal with the high school staff anymore. Beatrice shared here that all through the grades it was hard, but high school was the worst. My mother was drinking and doing drugs. She'd gotten to the point where she didn't mind doing it in front of us. So, but I will say that one of the final things that pushed it was I had to have her sign a document for school. And I had to sign it for her because she was too drunk and too high to sign it. And then her mother became upset and then just decided to unenroll her from school. The theme 3 here is motivating factors of self-awareness. They finally had the support that they needed to go back to school. They knew that in order to make a better life for themselves and their families, they needed to have advancement and they needed to move themselves forward. And then also here moving forward with resilience and some of the advice that they have for their peers and their awareness. The participants in the study emphasized the need to increase school support as well as trauma awareness in the schools. Not only trauma awareness, but helping staff in the schools become trauma prepared and trauma informed. According to them, these participants, these many students, would do better in school if staff and teachers were aware of their individual learning needs and abilities, and to identify behaviors and what are the root causes of those behaviors, and truly taking time to connect with the students and help the students understand where the teacher was coming from, but also where the youth is coming from. This theme is about the need here for awareness, for change in school settings, increased support and awareness of the existence of trauma. And from the interview responses, only one participant admitted that they had high school counselors in high school. And this calls for really taking a look at restructuring education to meet not only the academic needs of students, but most importantly, the emotional and mental health needs of students in order to get them to where they need to be academically. If the students aren't feeling safe, if they're struggling with their emotional and mental health needs, and if they are lacking the connectedness with teachers in school, the academics then become secondary, and we're working with behaviors and fighting with students to get them to comply versus rather seeking connection for understanding and seeking connection to help with that correction of those behaviors. And so that's why being connected to students and their families is vital. So the findings here, upon each one of the interviews, when we concluded, I did administer the post-traumatic growth inventory. And the students and their findings here, participants reported a significant growth in the areas of personal strength, realizing the new possibilities that they could take on, and then over the years, the improved relationships after dealing with their traumatic situations. They felt a greater feeling of self-reliance, increased ability to handle difficult situations, increase their ability to accept the way things work out, and increase perception of personal strength. These results really substantiate the principles of transformative learning as the students related to learning new perspectives, transforming their personal viewpoints, and transforming their habits of mind. The new possibilities includes new perspectives, transforming their personal viewpoints, and transforming habits of mind. As participants gain confidence in their self-worth, they were able to realize the presence of new possibilities and develop resilience necessary to overcome their ACEs. And they also reported here the need of connectedness and support from their family members and other adults as teachers, administrators, and others during their K-12 learning experiences. Without that connectedness, they felt that they just weren't set up for success, and that's what led them to drop out. So it's time to rethink. If you start to think about a behavior like smoke from a fire we can't see, right? And the question isn't how do I stop the smoke, but what's causing that fire and how can I stop it from burning? And all of the participants in this study, interviewed individually, all came back with connection, connection and understanding. And when we start to break down some implications here for systems change, what does that look like for us? In leadership here, some of my recommendations, some of the research recommendations that are suggested is that leadership and learning really go hand in hand. And in order for systems change to begin, leadership across all sectors need to fully comprehend and understand the impact of ACEs, not only at home, but the rippling effect it carries over into the community, school, and beyond. Legislative and leaders, educational leaders must take and begin to understand that neuroscience and trauma in the classroom, the decision-making, and providing that intensive mandatory in-service for all school staff and personnel. Such professional development will need to be ongoing and intensive to build schools that are trauma sensitive, trauma focused, and empowering all staff and teachers on how to respond to children, and creating a trust relationship here through connection will be a critical factor to build solid relationships with students. This is high stakes. If we take a look at the numbers shared, it's an estimated that high school dropouts account for 80% of the imprisoned population. And so if we were really to start to think about the costs involved, not meeting students' basic needs, it's significant. The funding here is high. For insurance, about 950,000 children and youth, or 8.1% of those with private insurance, lack coverage for mental health care. Yet 27 million adults in the US who suffer from mental illness do not receive that treatment that they need. Schools and adult literacy programs need long-term financial support to develop and sustain sufficient funding and adult literacy programs infrastructure. This infrastructure should at the very least implement comprehensive mental health education, increase the number of mental health professionals in schools and in adult literacy agencies, and establish collaborative connections with community-based mental health services. How can we create like wraparound services for these individuals? The educational reform here, how do we take a look and increase equality and eliminate gaps in access of care by boosting the availability of mental health services provided in schools? By taking a look at the individual needs of students, we can do this. And with 36 million adults in need of basic literacy skills, it's time to think about, time to really, really think about how we're doing education and how are we going to meet the needs of students in schools today. And also the parents of these students who are struggling with those basic literacy skills. And then zero tolerance. We need to really work with educators and providers in the adult literacy field and in K-12 and remove that mental health stigma and be resolute in the commitment for zero tolerance in schools. From school staff to children and adolescents to adults, every person needs to adhere to a zero tolerance policy in schools. Swift, strict enforcement of regulations and policies must be followed. But I also welcome boards and school districts to evaluate what's the mental health policies that we have in addition to the punitive processes that we have within school boards. I'd love to hear about some school boards that have taken action on mental health and realizing that behaviors often come and stem from something else, from a youth or child. Learning, how can we engage with universities and college and professional development departments, along with ongoing continuing education credits and certificate programs to incorporate trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed practices of care through mandatory college credits in addition to ongoing continuing education credits. I have to share with you, I'm a trained K-12 teacher. This wasn't something that we went through during my schooling. and limited professional development around anything trauma. And I live it right now. We have 5 adopted children, all with significant trauma histories. And it's a struggle working with professionals, working with educators, working with teams of people who truly lack that trauma sensitive approach, the trauma understanding. And if we were to have more of that in place, I feel that our 5 children would have different educational experiences today. So how can we take a look at providing those systems of change through education, through informing, using lived experiences, using the voices of parents, of youth that have witnessed and been, firsthand struggling with educational opportunities that are given to them in their schools. The next here is services, really, connectedness. How do we connect different services? How do we focus on professionals in the field and education and helping them become engaged and informed on trauma-informed best practices? What that looks like? How do we engage in early intervention and prevention with the focus of those wraparound services to really meet the needs of a child? And creating connected communities of wraparound services. The entire family will then be strengthened and supported. Really being connected. Professionals across all fields need to connect with youth and families and build those relationships. When individuals feel that they can belong, they are connected to their family, the community and interest groups, and many other health benefits will then begin to happen. Early intervention and prevention. Early intervention and prevention are instrumental in connection and building trust and relationships with anyone, especially for children and adolescents who are struggling daily. Creating those wraparound services with a team and utilizing a communication approach where every person on that team is understanding the services that are in place and the reason why. Providing these academic interventions along with mental health supportive services to families identifies those needs of support, and allowing mental health professionals to come into schools that are working with the family and the youth is imperative, I feel, to really help that youth feel supported not only at school, but also at home and in the community. And then those community supports here, engage in community of support, building strong partnerships through community by engaging schools, higher education, adult literacy providers, and the medical community, along with workforce leaders to meet the ongoing educational needs of our youth and young adults through engaging partnerships and collaborations with a trauma-informed lens, being trauma prepared. Adults will then be able to work with their youth, and the children's parents will be able to be educated, and adults will then be proficient in literacy. And then we're going to be supporting millions of adults who are lacking basic literacy skills, all while focused on the overall mental health needs of that parent, possibly of their child in their care. The parent's going to be able to understand and comprehend resources that are being sent home by the teachers, and then the parents will become more engaged in their children. It's just like a circle of effect here, and that's why so much support is needed. So future research, implications for future research here is the impact of ACEs across all geographic sectors and case studies. Some ideas that I have is that with over 1.2 million youth dropping out of school every year, adding to the millions of adults already struggling with basic literacy and lacking high school credentials, we need to rethink how can we combine these efforts and understanding why folks are dropping out of high school at an alarming rate, and how can we do some case studies here centered on individual and the lived experience to help provide further insight into the perceptions of women who dropped out of school. We know that early intervention is key. And in order to prevent high school dropouts, it's imperative that children and youth have early interventions and programs available to them. And with these early intervention programs, youth will feel supported and will decrease their likelihood of failing them through the cracks and being left behind. Within the context of this research, women expressed the interest here of being connected with adults that they could trust, and who took the time to get to know them personally. As a special needs mom here of 5 children, they all have an ACEs score of 10. This is significant trauma, and each one of our children needs to feel that connection with an adult in order for them to feel safe and secure in their educational and community environments and settings. And as the participants in this study shared, connectedness allows for trust to be formed. When leaders work to engage with lived experiences with youth and parent partners, a new understanding is formed, transferring knowledge. And when you work to do that with lived experiences here to the professional sector, a bridge to close the gap will naturally occur. And by doing so, the professionals here will have the real life account of the day-to-day lived experiences of at home, in the community, and in school. And that will be able to support the children and youth along with the family structure through best practices of being trauma prepared and trauma informed. And so what's the conclusion here, and why is this study significant? Through these in-depth interviews, women shared their heartfelt lived experiences. Some of these interviews were tearful, and one of them led me to cry too. And so they poured their heart and soul out as to what they experienced and the struggles that they went through, and reflected on their personal lived experiences. And this reflection here provides insight to the role of key factors such as the critical need of trusted, supportive adults, as well as a proper support system to meet the individual needs of students identifying with one or more ACEs. The bravery of the women in this study who shared their lived experiences adds to the narrative of women dropping out of school, later returning to an adult literacy program for remedial instruction to prepare for and successfully complete their GED that is currently lacking in scholarly research. Gaining insight into the mindset of those impacted will help guide and identify how leadership across all sectors of education, adult literacy, mental health, and where additional training and supports may be needed. This study provided opportunities for further research, and it only scratches the surface of the impact of adverse childhood experiences and resulting on the trauma on the women who dropped out of school and their journey through adult literacy and through their own personal transformation. This research is significant because it provides that scholarly research from a woman's perspective, and women who had educational experiences in 10 different states and their struggle. They expressed that their basic needs were not being met, how they felt unsafe at home, in the community, at school, how they felt unheard and not connected with adults at home, at school, or in the community, and how they felt disconnected from adults from every aspect of their life. This research study provides valuable insight on the importance of K-12 education, the vital need for adult literacy program agencies to support 54% of Americans who struggle to read, and 36 million Americans who really struggle with basic literacy and struggling to read. And so we have a silent crisis in America, and it's education and literacy. The crisis begins in early childhood with ACEs, whereas early childhood experiences where individual basic needs and learning needs have been failed to meet. And combined with these challenges within the home, create the perfect storm for women and their decision to drop out of high school. But I end too here with there's hope. And there's hope for connecting with students, their families, and helping families and youth towards resilience. The study participants concluded on how important it was for them to be truly connected with others in order for them to further their education. They were inspired to create a better life for themselves and their families, resulting in personal resilience and working to overcome their ACEs, leading them back to education through adult literacy programs, where they finally felt heard, where they finally felt listened to, and where they finally felt like they were among peers that understood them. They prepared for their GED, successfully completed their GED work, and overcame so many obstacles to fulfill their dreams, eventually leading all 5 of the research study participants back to a bachelor's degree, earning their master's degree, and this part blew my mind. But all of them are working on completing their PhDs right now. That was a significant surprise for me in this research. They are all working on their PhDs here with the desire to turn their educational achievements back forward to the community, reaching back to help others, all working together to move humanity forward in healing. So the power of connection, the power of being socially connected with one another, their desire to make the world a better place because they have lived and served within it. Here's my contact information. I know that Karen will also be sending that out to everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Wow. Well, Tracy, thank you. Thank you so much. And I don't know if you're able to see the chat, but there is one question from Monty in the chat, and I can quickly, I just had it up.
Sure, I'm just pulling it up now.
Thank you, because I'm losing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions on how we can support women who are unable to finish high school with childcare opportunities so they can complete their education, training, or learning opportunities?
One of the study participants was actually involved in the Welfare to Work program, the TANF program. And so she had an offer to either go to work and have daycare covered, or receive TANF resources to go back to school to earn her GED and receive daycare services. And in this program, she lived in the rural area. They were able to provide transportation. So they were able to pick her up because she didn't have a vehicle. They were able to pick her and her daughter up, take her daughter to daycare, and then she was able to go to school during the daytime and still receive those welfare to work W-2 TANF dollars. So that was successful. I've had experiences in the past also working with TANF folks and folks that were in the W-2 welfare to work program. And they also were able to identify support systems with childcare. But I would also like to see down the road, how can we enter mental health care also into that piece for parents, not only for the parent, but also for the children in their home. That's one way, is really to figure out how can we build that community of care. When I worked in the Milwaukee area, I was able to work to create adult learning labs in high schools where we provided ESL services and adult literacy services in addition to GED prep and support for adults. And their children had daycare services oftentimes available within the school district too, especially when kiddos were in school. So the kids were in school or preschool or kindergarten through 12th grade, and the parents were able to go to school during the daytime. And there also was evening hours available. And that was very powerful.
Wonderful. Susan, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy, for this presentation and your research. And I want to say, so I work in public health. I'm a community health strategist, and I also have a daughter with dyslexia, and I'm part of some nonprofit work or with some advocacy groups outside working on literacy, working on dyslexia. And what I want to say is, like, when you talked about implications for systems change, seemingly, I've been down this path a few times of the wicked problems. You know, it's you laid out a lot, you laid out a lot in your entire study. It felt like there were a few different issues in there. And I feel like if we could peel a few pieces of that onion away. So like if we address the literacy, just the literacy piece, because I've been watching this district by district, and it seemingly is acceptable to have 40% or lower rates of proficiency by third grade by school districts. They keep doing the same thing the next year. And seemingly to me, I'm thinking that's right there is the biggest red flag ever. If 40% is acceptable to you as a school district for your levels of literacy, that's a problem. So I feel like there's that first piece of this literacy thing. If you don't take that out of the equation, the mental health and the ACEs absolutely are the things that children are coming into, but they're also being blamed for the reason they can't read and write and learn these things. And I feel like that's a disconnect, because I don't believe that to be true. And I think it's when you do have that mentor, that you find that trusted individual that believes in you, that these children really do oftentimes have that advocate and have a turnaround. But I do want to say that to spend the energy one by one doing this, we're not winning. We're not changing the data, we're not changing the statistics, and we're not changing the outcomes. So like, I do believe it's systems change. What's tough about that is that you're going up against systems that are your allies with in so many other areas, right? So it's like you're taking a system where I'm for the schools, I'm your community, I'm your person to support it. But I'm also, when I come in with a critique or a change, I'm seen as the problem from that system. So I want to tell you, if you have thoughts on how that can be different, we're having to pick at it one by one, starting with the UW, starting with the training of the teachers and going at it that way. Because if we don't get that, we don't get the next pieces. But I'm going to tell you, so many other states are adopting and looking at that literacy piece. And then the ACEs piece is that there is some, that more and more support. It's written into the governor's budget. I mean, there's a lot of things going on around that. So I'm hoping we get this sooner than later, because we keep passing kids through, even with our graduation rates. Even if they graduate, sometimes we're pushing them out of a system into a bigger world in which they can't read and write. So that's not right. It's not right.
When I worked in Milwaukee, I'll never forget this one gentleman that came in, and he was 21 and he had his high school diploma and he graduated, and he's like, I failed every test after third grade. I went to school, I showed up, here's my high school diploma, but I can't read. And he was sitting there crying. A young man, all he wanted to do is get a job and get employed and move on to the next season of his life. And he couldn't until he really worked on his education. And so that was the catalyst. Here is just my experience in K-12, but then also working in adult literacy for 10 years. And then, like, how does trauma play a role in all of this? And that component came because of the 5 kiddos that we adopted and from foster care, and realizing the struggles that they go through on a daily basis, not only at home in the community, but also in school. And it really comes down, it's not that the teachers aren't trying, but if you don't understand it, like I was a teacher, I didn't get it. I'll be the first one to admit it. I thought I knew it all, when we started to foster and adopt. And then I'm like, holy cats, I know nothing. This trauma is real, and it's brain development. And we really need to rethink how our approach is. And then you add the trauma part of it, of COVID, and realizing that children are social emotionally behind because they were disconnected and they weren't with their peers for years. So there's a lot at play, and we have to really rethink how we've been doing things to really focus on the future and how can we reach children and youth and also their family members who are struggling.
Tracy, we have one more question here. In any of your studies, did you find data with people that have dyslexia and dropping out of school?
There is some information out there, but because I wasn't, that wasn't my focus, I had to narrow my focus because I wanted to go down every rabbit hole there was. And I kept pulling myself back out. Nope, not going down this hole, because it wasn't focused on my research. And so I had to, in my office here, I had to put my buckets on the wall, and that was the bucket of information that I needed to go and gather for this research project. But that would definitely be another field, because I have dear friends with children that struggle with dyslexia, and that's a whole nother component that I'm not well versed in myself to speak on. And there's another message here from Shanna about, recommended classes and workshops. I haven't even dug into that yet either. So I just finished this research after 5.5 years. December 14th was my D-Day, my defense date. And I haven't had an opportunity to really find solid information. I am trained in TBRI, that's the trust-based relational intervention training, and I highly recommend that. It is online, and you can become a practitioner if you go in person for the training, and they have trainings throughout the United States. But there's a classroom teacher 101, and then there's a TBRI 101. I did both of them, and by far I prefer the TBRI 101 training. And really that talks about connection and how do we connect with a youth and build that trusting relationship. And then there's a link here to additional mental health training modules that was just put in the chat window too.
Awesome. Well, seeing no more questions in the chat and knowing that my clock says it's 10:58, I just want to thank all of you for carving out time in your day to hear the really very interesting message that Tracy had to convey with us today. This is being recorded. It will be on our website. I'm hoping that will happen by mid next week, so you can share this with other people too that you think might be interested. Tracy, we can't thank you enough. We congratulate you for earning your dissertation, for exploring such a valuable topic, and thank all of you again for attending. And we just wish you a great day, right? Sun shining. So anyway, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.